Before we dive into this chilling narrative, a brief word of caution. This story explores themes of memory loss, psychological distress, and the unknown. Listener discretion is advised. Imagine for a moment waking up and staring at your own reflection, only to find the person looking back is a complete stranger. Not because your face has changed, but because the entire tapestry of your past, every single thread of memory that defines who you are, has been meticulously unraveled. Your name, your family, your triumphs, your heartbreaks, all gone. Wiped clean. Now imagine that unsettling void wasn't the aftermath of some tragic accident or a slow, cruel disease. Imagine it was the deliberate work of a place that erases you. For Jessica Hayes, this terrifying concept wasn't a philosophical thought experiment. It was a living nightmare, born from the disappearance of her older brother, Ethan. Ethan wasn't just her brother. He was her anchor, her confidant, and a brilliant, if notoriously restless historian. He was the kind of person who chased forgotten footnotes in ancient texts like other people chased headlines. And then 6 months ago, he vanished. His last message to her had been a scrambled voicemail, filled with static and a frantic urgency that still haunted her sleep. Jess, it's real. Viridia Island. The old maps, the legends, it's all true. Something truly ancient, they want to keep it a secret. I think it's connected to the forgetting. The line had cut out, leaving behind only the chilling echo of his fear. Viridia Island. The name itself felt like a whisper from a forgotten dream, beautiful yet laced with something sinister. Official search efforts had been a joke. A remote, uninhabited speck of land far off the coast of Maine, riddled with treacherous currents and shrouded in perpetual fog. The Coast Guard had conducted a cursory sweep, found no trace of Ethan's rented boat, and quickly declared him lost at sea, another victim of the unforgiving Atlantic. But Jessica knew better. Ethan wasn't just lost. He was taken. Or worse, he was there. Her life since that call had become a relentless, obsessive quest. She devoured every scrap of information she could find about Viridia Island. Most of it was folklore, the kind of cautionary tales old fishermen spun over strong coffee in dimly lit diners. Stories of boats that sailed too close and were never seen again. Stories of sailors who stumbled back to shore, their eyes wide and vacant, their memories a blank slate. They called it the Island of Lost Minds, the Whisperer, or most chillingly, the Erasing Shore. Jessica, a pragmatic urban planner, had always scoffed at such superstitions. But Ethan's message, combined with the eerie consistency of the legends across generations, began to chip away at her skepticism. She found fragmented references in obscure maritime logs from the 18th century, describing ships that reported strange magnetic anomalies and crew members suffering from sudden, profound amnesia after encountering the island's shores. One captain's journal detailed how his first mate, a man known for his sharp wit and encyclopedic knowledge of navigation, returned from a brief shore excursion on Viridia utterly bewildered, unable to recall his own name or the faces of his lifelong shipmates. The captain wrote of a sickening emptiness in the man's eyes, a void where his very soul used to reside. These weren't just old wives' tales. There were patterns. There were threads. And Jessica, fueled by a grief so profound it felt like a physical ache, began to pull at them. She spent weeks in dusty university archives, poring over forgotten geological surveys, old cartography, even cryptic anthropological notes on indigenous myths that spoke of a place of forgetting, where spirits were cleansed or perhaps simply extinguished. She found a faded photograph taken in the early 1900s of a small research expedition to Viridia. The caption was unsettlingly vague. Viridia Expedition Preliminary Survey. Results inconclusive. Team disbanded due to unforeseen circumstances. There were no further records of what those circumstances were, or what became of the researchers. The faces in the photo, however, particularly one young woman with bright, curious eyes, seemed to gaze out with a faint, almost imperceptible apprehension. Jessica knew she couldn't rely on official channels anymore. They had closed Ethan's case. They had dismissed the island as nothing more than a dangerous, unremarkable rock. She needed someone who understood the sea, someone who respected the old stories, even if they didn't fully believe them. She needed a captain willing to take her directly into the heart of the mystery that led her to Silas Blackwood, an old salt with a face weathered by decades of sun and spray, and eyes that had seen too much of the ocean's unforgiving nature. He ran a small, battered fishing trawler out of a secluded cove, his reputation for discretion as solid as his boat. When Jessica first approached him, explaining her mission, Silas had merely grunted, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "Viridia, he'd rasped, his voice like gravel. "Place ain't natural. Currents'll rip a boat apart faster than you can blink. And what the currents don't get, the island does." Jessica had laid out her evidence. Ethan's voicemail, the historical accounts, the eerie patterns. She spoke of her brother's passion, his drive, and her unshakable conviction that he was still out there, somewhere on that remote, foreboding landmass. She offered him every last cent of her savings and then some. Silas had listened, his expression unreadable, occasionally spitting tobacco juice into the churning waves. Finally, after a long, agonizing silence, he'd looked at her, his eyes surprisingly keen. "You got a death wish, girl? Or just a wish for the truth?" "The truth," Jessica had replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Whatever it is." Silas had sighed, a sound like deflating bellows. "All right, but you listen to me. Every word. When those old legends talk about the island taking your mind, they ain't just spinning yarns. There's something out there, something that messes with the head, and if we get a whiff of it, we turn back. No arguments. Clear?" Jessica had nodded, a surge of desperate hope mixing with a cold dread. And so, 2 days later, under a sky the color of bruised plums, Jessica found herself on Silas's trawler, the Sea Serpent, chugging steadily northeast. The air grew colder, heavier, carrying the metallic tang of salt and something else. Something indescribable, like ozone mixed with ancient earth. The further they traveled from the mainland, the more the world seemed to shrink around them. The vast expanse of the ocean became an oppressive, isolating force, amplifying every creak of the boat, every groan of the wind. Silas, stoic at the helm, occasionally cast a wary glance at Jessica, then back at his worn charts. He pointed out landmarks, not with the enthusiasm of a guide, but with the grim precision of a man navigating a minefield. "That's Black Rock Shoals," he'd said, his voice low. "Swallows more boats than any storm. And just beyond it, Viridia." Hours bled into one another. The fog, a constant companion in these waters, thickened, reducing visibility to mere yards. It wasn't a gentle, ethereal mist. It was a dense, suffocating blanket that seemed to press down on them, stealing sound and perspective. Jessica felt an icy tendril of fear begin to coil in her stomach. The silence was profound, broken only by the rhythmic thrum of the engine and the occasional mournful cry of a distant gull. Even the gulls sounded lost. Then, through a momentary thinning of the fog, she saw it. A dark, jagged silhouette against the oppressive gray, rising abruptly from the churning sea. It wasn't a picturesque island with sandy beaches and swaying palms. Viridia was raw, brutal, and ancient. Towering cliffs, sculpted by millennia of wind and waves, plunged into the frothing ocean. Patches of stunted, gnarled trees clung precariously to the rocky slopes, their branches twisted into grotesque skeletal forms. There was no sign of life, no welcoming light, no trace of human habitation. Just stark, primeval rock and the relentless, hungry ocean. As they drew closer, Jessica noticed something even more unsettling. The water around the island wasn't the usual deep blue or green of the Atlantic. It had a strange, almost milky luminescence, a faint, unsettling glow that pulsed subtly beneath the surface. And the air felt different. It was heavy, charged, almost electric, making the hairs on her arms stand on end. A faint, almost imperceptible hum seemed to emanate from the island itself, a low-frequency vibration that resonated deep within her chest. Silas, his face now etched with a grim determination, cut the engine. The sudden silence was deafening, amplifying the strange hum and the rhythmic slap of waves against the hull. He pointed towards a narrow, treacherous-looking inlet, barely visible through the swirling mist. "That's the only way in, if there even is a way anymore," he murmured, his voice barely a whisper. "The currents in there, they change without warning. It's like the island itself is breathing." He turned to Jessica, his eyes dark with a warning she couldn't miss. "You sure about this, girl? There's no turning back once we enter that mouth." Jessica looked at the desolate, foreboding mass of land, then back at the open, endless ocean behind them. She thought of Ethan, his frantic voice, his desperate plea. She thought of the blank, empty eyes of the men in the old journals. She took a deep breath, the strange, heavy air filling her lungs. "Yes," she said, her voice firm, resolute. "I'm sure." Silas nodded slowly, then fired up the engine again, a low rumble breaking the oppressive silence. He steered the sea serpent with expert precision, inching towards the narrow inlet that seemed to swallow the light. As they moved deeper into its embrace, the cliffs loomed overhead, casting them into an unnatural gloom. The air grew colder, the strange hum intensified, and Jessica felt a sudden, profound wave of disorientation wash over her. A fleeting moment of dizziness, a flicker at the edges of her vision, a momentary blankness where her own thoughts should have been. It passed quickly, leaving her shaken, but convinced it was just nerves. Or was it? They were inside the mouth now, the churning water pulling at the boat. The island had them. The island had them. The boat lurched violently, then scraped against something solid. Michael, ever the pragmatist, was already securing it to a barnacled pillar that seemed to rise directly from the dark water. Jessica, however, found herself frozen, her hand clutching the side of the small vessel, her eyes wide, taking in their surroundings. They weren't at a sandy beach or a bustling port. Instead, the churning water had delivered them into what felt like a natural cavern, carved into the very rock face of the island. Overhead, the jagged ceiling dripped with perpetual moisture, reflecting the dim light that filtered in from a narrow opening far above. The air was thick with the scent of salt, damp earth, and something else, something faintly metallic, almost electrical, that prickled at the back of her throat. "Well, this is atmospheric," Michael said, his voice echoing unnaturally in the confined space. He turned, offering her a hand, oblivious to the shiver that traced its way down her spine. "Come on, let's see where this leads." Jessica took his hand, her fingers cold. As she stepped onto the slick, moss-covered stone, a wave of profound disorientation washed over her. It wasn't the brief blankness from before, but a sudden intense feeling of having been here, exactly here countless times. A phantom memory, vivid and unsettling, of the cool, damp rock beneath her feet, the echo of water, the metallic tang in the air. But it was impossible. She'd never seen this place in her life. She shook her head, trying to dislodge the feeling. "Did you feel that?" she asked Michael, her voice barely a whisper. He paused, looking around. "Feel what? The damp? Yeah, it's pretty clammy in here. Probably leads to some old pirate tunnels or something. Come on, adventure awaits." He grinned, clearly excited by the novelty of it all. Jessica didn't share his enthusiasm. The feeling lingered, a ghostly imprint on her mind. They followed a narrow, winding path that ascended steeply, the stone steps worn smooth by centuries of unknown passage. The air grew warmer, the metallic scent more pronounced. Soon, the path opened into a breathtaking, almost fantastical landscape. They emerged into a vast, verdant valley, bathed in an ethereal golden light. Towering ancient trees, unlike anything Jessica had ever seen, rose majestically, their leaves a vibrant emerald green, their branches draped with bioluminescent moss that pulsed with a soft, inner glow. A mist, thin and shimmering, clung to the ground, giving the entire scene an otherworldly quality. In the center of this valley stood a collection of structures that defied conventional architecture. They weren't houses or villas, but rather organic-looking dwellings, seemingly grown from the earth itself, with roofs that mimicked giant iridescent seashells and walls that curved like polished obsidian. No straight lines, no sharp angles. Everything was fluid, natural, yet clearly designed. And there were people. A small group had gathered near one of the shell-like structures, their faces turned towards Michael and Jessica. They weren't dressed in modern clothing, but in simple, flowing garments of undyed linen, adorned with intricate patterns that seemed to glow faintly in the strange light. Their expressions were calm, serene, almost vacant. One woman, her hair a startling shade of silver that seemed to catch the light, stepped forward. She was tall and slender, with eyes that were a startling, luminous violet. "Welcome," she said, her voice soft, melodic, yet carrying effortlessly across the valley. "We have been expecting you." Jessica felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "Expecting us?" she managed, glancing at Michael, who looked just as surprised. "How could you know we were coming?" The woman smiled, a gentle, almost sad curve of her lips. "The island knows. It always does." She gestured with a graceful hand towards one of the smaller, more secluded dwellings. "Your accommodations await. Sarah will show you." A younger woman with kind, dark eyes and a shy demeanor detached herself from the group and approached them. "Hello," Sarah said, her voice a little hesitant. "I'm Sarah. Please follow me. As they walked, Jessica couldn't shake the feeling of being observed, not just by the people they passed, but by the very island itself. The glowing moss, the strange trees, the silent, watchful faces. It all felt like part of a living, breathing entity. There were no sounds of animals, no birdsong, no buzzing insects. Only a profound, almost oppressive silence, broken only by the gentle rustle of the leaves and the distant, rhythmic hum that seemed to emanate from deep within the earth. "It's beautiful here," Michael said, trying to make conversation with Sarah. "Truly unique. What's it called, this island?" Sarah paused, a small frown creasing her brow. She looked up, as if searching for the answer in the shimmering mist. It's just the island," she said finally, her voice sounding uncertain, as if she was struggling to recall something. "That's what we call it." Jessica exchanged a look with Michael. "Just the island," she repeated. "No other name? Like Isle of Serenity or Lost Paradise?" She tried to lighten the mood, but the words felt hollow. Sarah shook her head slowly. "No, just the island." She seemed to genuinely struggle, a flicker of confusion in her eyes before it was replaced by that same serene, almost blank expression. They reached their dwelling, a circular structure with a domed iridescent roof. Inside, it was surprisingly spacious, furnished with simple, elegant pieces carved from a dark, lustrous wood. A large circular bed occupied the center of the room, draped with soft, woven fabrics. A small circular window overlooked a tranquil koi pond, where fish with scales of gold and silver glided silently beneath the glowing moss. "This is lovely," Jessica said, forcing a smile. She placed her small backpack on a low table. As she did, she felt another one of those strange internal flickers, a brief, almost imperceptible hiccup in her mind. She blinked, trying to remember what she had just been thinking. It was gone. A thought had just vanished, leaving behind only a faint echo of its former presence. "What was that?" she murmured to herself. Michael, meanwhile, was already exploring the room. "No Wi-Fi, I bet," he chuckled, checking for outlets. "Probably no cell service either. This is truly off the grid, babe. Exactly what we needed." Sarah stood by the entrance, her hands clasped in front of her. "There is a small spring nearby," she said, "for fresh water. And meals are served in the central common house, by the great tree, at the rising and setting of the sun. Please make yourselves comfortable." She hesitated, then added, "If you need anything, just ask." "Thank you, Sarah," Jessica said, watching the young woman carefully. "Can you tell us a bit more about the island? What do people do here?" Sarah's gaze drifted, her violet eyes unfocused for a moment. We live," she said, her voice flat. "We tend the gardens. We remember." She paused, then corrected herself, her brow furrowing slightly. "No, we don't remember. We just are." She looked confused by her own words, then quickly regained her composure, her expression smoothing back into that serene blankness. "I must go now. Enjoy your stay." And with that, Sarah turned and glided out of the dwelling, disappearing into the shimmering mist. Jessica and Michael were left alone. "Did you hear that?" Jessica asked, turning to Michael, her voice urgent. "We don't remember. We just are." "What was that all about?" Michael shrugged, already pulling a book from his bag. "Probably some local spiritual philosophy, Jess. You know, live in the moment, mindfulness, all that stuff. It's a retreat, remember? They're probably all about letting go of the past." "But it sounded like she was struggling to say it," Jessica insisted, a knot tightening in her stomach, like she was trying to remember something else but couldn't. "You're overthinking it," Michael said, though he didn't quite meet her eyes. He sat on the edge of the bed, flipping open his book. "Come on, relax. We're here for a break. Forget about work. Forget about the city. Forget about everything." His words, meant to be reassuring, struck Jessica as deeply unsettling. Forget about everything. Was that what this island was designed to do? She walked to the circular window, gazing out at the tranquil koi pond. The fish moved with an unnerving grace, their scales gleaming. Then she noticed something odd. One of the fish, larger than the others, had a faint, almost invisible scar near its gills. And suddenly, another wave of recognition, of déjà vu, washed over her. She knew that scar. She knew that fish. But from where? The sensation was fleeting, like trying to grasp smoke. It left her feeling hollow, as if a piece of her own intricate mental tapestry had been snipped away. She turned from the window, her heart pounding. "Michael," she said, her voice barely audible, "do you remember what we had for breakfast this morning?" He looked up from his book, a slight frown on his face. "Sure. Eggs and toast, right? Why?" "No," Jessica said, her voice trembling. "We had pancakes. With blueberries. You specifically asked for them." Michael stared at her, then his gaze slid away towards the ceiling. He closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them, a flicker of confusion in their depths. "Pancakes," he repeated slowly. "Are you sure? I could have sworn." "No, you're right. Pancakes. That's weird. Why did I think eggs?" A cold dread began to seep into Jessica's bones. It was a small thing, trivial, easily dismissed. But coupled with Sarah's strange statement, and Jessica's own unsettling flashes of blankness and false memory, it felt like the first crack in a perfectly constructed facade. She looked around the beautiful, silent room, at the strange, organic architecture, the ancient, glowing trees outside. The island was breathtaking, yes, but beneath its serene beauty, she was starting to sense something far more sinister. Something that wasn't just erasing memories but replacing them. She felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to leave, to shout, to run. But where would they go? The boat was gone, presumably pulled back into the hidden cavern. They were trapped. And the island, it seemed, was only just beginning its work. The oppressive humidity of the jungle seemed to press in closer, a physical manifestation of the dread coiling in Jessica's gut. She whirled around, scanning the dense foliage that lined the cove. "Michael! The boat! It's really gone!" Her voice, usually steady, cracked with a tremor she couldn't control. Michael, who had been trying to pry open one of the supply crates, dropped his tool with a clatter. His face, already pale from the journey, drained further. He rushed to the water's edge, peering into the murky depths where the boat had been. The small bobbing craft that had been their lifeline, their only way back to civilization, was undeniably absent. The entrance to the hidden cavern, previously a mere slit in the rock face, now looked like an impenetrable wall, the tide having risen just enough to obscure its lower half. "No, no, no," he muttered, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. "It can't be. Maybe it just drifted? Pulled back by the current." He sounded less like he believed it and more like he was begging for it to be true. David and Emily emerged from the makeshift camp they'd started setting up further inland, drawn by Jessica's shout. David, ever the pragmatist, immediately took in the scene. His eyes, usually sharp and analytical, widened in disbelief. Emily, typically the most optimistic of the group, put a hand over her mouth, her eyes darting between the empty water and the worried faces of her friends. We're stranded?" Emily whispered, the word hanging heavy in the air. A death knell to their adventure. Jessica felt a wave of nausea. Stranded. On an island that somehow, impossibly, had swallowed their boat whole. An island that, according to the legend, stole memories. The thought sent a chill far colder than any ocean breeze. They spent the next hour in a frantic, desperate search. Michael and David explored the perimeter of the cove, hoping to find some trace of the boat, a rope, anything. Jessica and Emily checked the supplies, trying to mentally catalog what they had, a futile attempt to regain a sense of control. As they worked, an unsettling quiet settled over the group, punctuated only by the rustling of leaves and the distant cry of an unseen bird. The jungle, once an exciting backdrop, now felt menacing, its shadows concealing unknown threats. It started subtly, insidiously, like a creeping fog. Jessica was trying to remember what she had packed in the small waterproof bag she brought ashore. She knew she had a specific type of energy bar, her favorite, a dark chocolate and almond one. But as she rummaged, she couldn't recall why she'd packed it, or even if she'd eaten one that morning. It was a fleeting thought, easily dismissed as stress. She'd been through a lot. Later, as they gathered for a meager dinner of canned rations, Michael brought up their previous evening's conversation. "Remember what David said about the current patterns? How we'd need to leave at high tide?" David frowned. I don't recall saying anything about current patterns, Michael. I was focused on the reef navigation." Michael scoffed, a nervous laugh escaping him. "Of course you did. We talked about it right after dinner, when we were planning the morning departure. You even drew a diagram in the sand." David shook his head, looking genuinely perplexed. "I didn't. I really don't remember that at all. Are you sure you're not mixing it up with something else?" A flicker of unease passed between them. It was a minor disagreement, easily attributed to exhaustion or misremembering. But Jessica felt a prickle of recognition. This was how it started, wasn't it? Small, inconsequential gaps. The next morning brought more disquieting incidents. Emily, usually meticulous, couldn't find her water bottle. She swore she'd placed it right beside her sleeping bag. They searched for 10 minutes before Michael found it, inexplicably, near the cooking fire, far from where Emily remembered leaving it. She blamed herself, muttering about being scatterbrained. Jessica, meanwhile, found herself struggling with simple tasks. She'd pick up a tool, then forget what she intended to use it for. She'd start a sentence, then lose her train of thought midway. It was like her mind was trying to grasp at smoke, her thoughts dissolving before she could fully form them. The feeling was frustrating, terrifyingly so. They decided to explore the island, hoping to find another way off, or at least a higher vantage point to signal for help. The jungle was thick, an emerald labyrinth of towering trees and tangled vines. Every step was an effort, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and exotic blossoms. As they pushed deeper, Jessica felt an odd sense of familiarity, as if she'd walked these paths before, even though she knew that was impossible. Then, just as quickly, the feeling would vanish, leaving behind an echoing emptiness. They walked for hours, their initial optimism slowly eroding under the relentless sun and the oppressive quiet of the jungle. David, who had been leading the way, suddenly stopped. "Hey, Michael," he called out, his voice tight. "Didn't you say you packed your satellite phone in the dry bag?" Michael patted his pockets, then checked the small backpack he was carrying. "Yeah, it should be right here." "Why?" David pointed to a patch of mossy ground just ahead. Lying there, half buried in the damp soil, was a small gray device. It was Michael's satellite phone. Its screen was cracked, and it was clearly water damaged beyond repair. Michael stared at it, bewildered. "But I know I packed it. I distinctly remember putting it in the dry bag. I even double-checked the seal." "It looks like it's been here for a while," Emily observed, nudging it gently with her foot. "The moss is growing over it." Jessica knelt, examining the phone. It was indeed ruined, but more than that, a cold dread began to solidify in her stomach. "Michael," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "when was the last time you saw it?" He furrowed his brow, thinking hard. "This morning, when I was packing up our camp near the cove. I put it in the dry bag before we started walking." He sounded so sure. Too sure for the evidence before them. "No, you didn't," Jessica stated, her voice gaining a strange authority. "You were looking for it then. You asked me if I'd seen it. You said you couldn't remember where you'd put it. And then you just shrugged it off, saying you must have packed it deeper than you thought." Michael looked at her, then at David and Emily. Their faces were etched with the same confused concern. I don't remember that," he said, his voice faltering. "I really don't." A shared, unspoken fear began to grip them. This wasn't just misplacing keys or forgetting a trivial conversation. This was a direct contradiction of recent significant events. "Okay, everyone," Jessica said, trying to project a calmness she didn't feel. "Let's sit down. We need to talk about this. Really talk." They found a small clearing, shaded by a massive banyan tree whose aerial roots descended like a curtain. The air here felt heavier, almost buzzing with an unseen energy. "Something is happening to us," Jessica began, her gaze sweeping over each of their faces. Small things at first. Emily couldn't find her water bottle. David didn't remember talking about the current. "I've been losing my train of thought. And now, Michael, your phone. And you don't remember looking for it." Emily hugged her knees to her chest. "I thought I was just tired. Or maybe I'm going crazy." "You're not going crazy, Emily," David said, his voice low. "We're all experiencing it. I remember the conversation about the current now, vaguely. It's like a fog that lifts, then descends again." Michael, however, was still struggling. "But how? What could cause this? It's not like we hit our heads." "The legend," Jessica said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "The legend about the island that erases memories. We dismissed it as a silly tale, a local superstition." A silence fell, thick and suffocating. The reality of their situation, the sheer impossibility of it, started to sink in. They weren't just stranded. They were being systematically stripped of their minds. "So what, we're just going to forget everything?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. "Forget who we are? Forget each other. The thought was unbearable. Jessica couldn't imagine a more cruel fate. To be alive but empty. No, Jessica declared, a fierce determination hardening her resolve. We're not going to let that happen. We need to fight it. We need to find out what's causing this and how to stop it. David nodded, his earlier pragmatism now replaced by a grim resolve. She's right. Panicking won't help. We need a plan. First, we need to document everything. Every conversation, every detail. Write it down, no matter how small. They decided to use their remaining notebooks and pens, promising to compare notes frequently. It was a desperate measure, a flimsy defense against an invisible enemy. As the afternoon wore on, they continued their exploration, but with a new sense of urgency and paranoia. Every rustle in the undergrowth, every strange call of a bird, heightened their anxiety. The memory glitches continued, growing more frequent and more unsettling. Jessica found herself forgetting the names of common plants she'd just identified. Emily forgot what she'd eaten for lunch, barely an hour after finishing it. Michael started repeating questions he'd already asked. They eventually stumbled upon something that made their blood run cold. Deep within the jungle, where the trees grew so dense the sunlight barely penetrated, they found a clearing. But this was no ordinary clearing. In the center stood a structure, ancient and weathered, half swallowed by the encroaching vegetation. It was a monolith, a tall, dark stone pillar, intricately carved with symbols that seemed alien and unsettling. The air around it felt strangely still, heavy with an almost palpable energy. As they approached, a low hum seemed to emanate from the stone, a sound barely perceptible, more felt than heard, vibrating deep in their bones. The symbols on the monolith were unlike anything Jessica had ever seen. They weren't hieroglyphs or any known script. They were swirling organic shapes that seemed to shift and writhe before her eyes, almost like they were alive. "What is this?" Michael whispered, his voice hushed with awe and fear. Emily reached out a hand as if to touch the stone, but David quickly pulled her back. "Don't. We don't know what this is." Jessica felt an inexplicable pull towards the monolith, a strange magnetic force. It was as if the stone was calling to her, inviting her to decipher its secrets. But there was also a profound sense of danger, a warning echoing in the silent depths of her mind. As she gazed at the strange symbols, something shifted in her perception. The lines seemed to coalesce, to form patterns. And for a fleeting moment, a word or perhaps an image flashed into her mind. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, leaving her with a dizzying headache and a feeling of profound disorientation. "Did anyone else feel that?" she asked, clutching her head. Michael and Emily nodded, their faces pale. David looked troubled. "It's like it's trying to communicate with us. Or maybe trying to do something to us." They backed away slowly, the strange hum intensifying as they retreated. The monolith stood sentinel, silent and ominous, a dark heart at the center of the island's mystery. It felt like the source, the very engine of the memory-erasing phenomenon. They knew with a certainty that chilled them to the bone that this wasn't just a natural occurrence. This island wasn't merely cursed by a legend. It was an active, malevolent force, and they had just found its core. The question now was, what would happen if they stayed too long? And more terrifyingly, what would happen if they tried to leave? The boat was gone. The monolith was here. And their memories, their very identities, were slowly being chipped away, piece by agonizing piece. The silence that followed Michael's whispered realization was colder than any ocean wind. It wasn't merely the absence of sound. It was the chilling void where hope should have been. The boat, their only link to the life they remembered, was undeniably gone. No trace of it remained, not even a ripple in the calm, jade-green water. Jessica, her face pale, stumbled backward, her hand flying to her mouth. David, ever the pragmatist, scanned the horizon with a desperate intensity that even he couldn't hide. Emily, however, simply stared at the towering obsidian monolith, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and an almost hypnotic fascination. "It took it," Jessica finally choked out, her voice barely a whisper. "The island. It took our boat." Michael shook his head, a futile gesture against the overwhelming evidence. "Or something else did. But why? What purpose does it serve?" He turned to the monolith, its smooth, dark surface reflecting the shifting clouds like a polished mirror. "Is that responsible? Is it some kind of ancient mechanism?" David walked to the water's edge, kicking at the sand. "Mechanism or not, we're stranded. No signal, no supplies beyond what we brought. And what was that again? What did we pack? He frowned, his brow furrowed in concentration. I remember a cooler, a couple of backpacks. But specific contents? Blank. A shiver ran down Michael's spine. It had started, the insidious erosion of their minds. He tried to recall their packing list, the exact brand of water bottles, the snacks Emily had insisted on. The details were hazy, like trying to grasp smoke. He could remember that they packed, but not what. "My name is Jessica," Jessica said suddenly, her voice trembling as if testing the words. "I'm a graphic designer. I live in Seattle. My brother's name is Mark." She rattled off facts, a desperate incantation against the encroaching fog. "And I'm Michael," Michael responded, the words feeling foreign even as he spoke them. "I'm a software engineer. From Boston. My parents are Mary and Robert." He paused. Were they? He was sure they were, but the conviction felt a little less solid than it should. A tiny, almost imperceptible crack in the foundation of his identity. Emily, still fixated on the monolith, turned slowly. "I remember my favorite color is blue. And I have a cat named Mittens." She offered this information not with confidence, but with a fragile hope, as if hoping the others would validate her fading reality. David punched the air in frustration. "This is insane. We have to fight it. We have to write things down. Everything we know. Our names, our lives, our plan." It was a desperate, logical plea, and Michael agreed. They scrounged through their remaining bags, finding a waterproof notebook and a pen. They sat on the sand, beneath the oppressive gaze of the monolith, frantically scrawling down their personal histories. Michael Thompson, 32, software engineer, Boston. Parents: Mary and Robert. Sister Sarah. Favorite food: pizza. Goal: start my own company. Asterisk Jessica Miller, 29, graphic designer, Seattle. Brother Mark. Loves hiking. Dream: travel the world. Asterisk David Chun, 35, architect, Los Angeles. Married to Lisa. Kids: Maya and Leo. Passion: building sustainable homes. Asterisk Emily Davis, 26, vet tech, Denver. Cat: Mittens. Loves animals. Wants to open an animal sanctuary. Asterisk. As they wrote, a strange fatigue began to settle over them, a dull ache behind their eyes. The air around the monolith seemed to grow heavier, almost viscous. Despite their efforts, doubt gnawed at them. Was Emily's cat really named Mittens? Had Michael's sister always been Sarah? The act of writing felt less like solidifying memories and more like etching in wet sand, only for the tide to wash it away. They spent the first few hours in a haze of fear and frantic activity. David, ever the leader in practical matters, suggested they needed to find fresh water and a more secure shelter. The beach, with its exposed sand and the looming monolith, felt too vulnerable. "We should head inland," David proposed, pointing towards the dense, emerald jungle that began where the beach ended. "There has to be a stream, something. And cover." Michael nodded, his mind still reeling from the memory loss. "Agreed. But let's stick together. And try to mark our path. We don't know what else this island holds." As they ventured into the jungle, the air grew thick with the scent of unfamiliar blossoms and damp earth. Towering trees with broad, waxy leaves formed a canopy so dense that only dappled sunlight broke through. The sounds of the jungle were alien chirps and rustles that didn't quite sound like any birds or insects they knew. It was beautiful in a primal, unsettling way, a verdant trap. Emily, usually the most cheerful, was uncharacteristically quiet, her gaze darting nervously from side to side. "Does anyone else feel like they're being watched?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the rustling leaves. Michael tried to dismiss it as paranoia, a natural reaction to their predicament, but he couldn't shake the feeling either. A prickling sensation on the back of his neck, a sense of unseen eyes tracking their every move. After an hour of pushing through tangled vines and thick undergrowth, they stumbled upon a small clearing. In its center, surrounded by a ring of luminous, violet-colored mushrooms, was another structure. Not a monolith this time, but a perfectly spherical metallic orb, about 10 feet in diameter. Its surface was seamless, reflecting the jungle around it with an eerie distortion, like a funhouse mirror. There were no visible seams, no doors, no windows. Simply was. "What in the world?" David breathed, his hand going to his mouth. Jessica stared, her eyes wide. First the monolith, now this? What kind of island is this? As they cautiously approached the orb, the luminous mushrooms pulsed faintly, casting an otherworldly glow. A low hum emanated from the sphere, a sound so subtle it vibrated more in their bones than in their ears. It was a sound that seemed to resonate with the very air, a deep resonant thrumming that made their teeth ache. It feels alive, Emily murmured, stepping back instinctively. Michael felt a sudden sharp pang of disorientation. He looked at Jessica, then David, then Emily. He knew their faces, he knew their names, but for a fleeting, terrifying moment he couldn't remember how he knew them. The context, the shared experiences that bound them together, had evaporated, leaving only hollow recognition. "Michael, are you okay?" Jessica asked, noticing his sudden stillness. He blinked, shaking his head to clear the fog. "Yeah, just a bit dizzy. This hum." But the moment had been profoundly disturbing. It wasn't just losing facts about themselves, it was losing the fabric of their relationships. The very memories that defined their connection to one another were now under attack. They found a small stream nearby, its water clear and cold, a small victory in a sea of unknowns. They filled their water bottles, but the tension remained thick in the air. The orb, with its silent, throbbing hum, seemed to draw their gaze even from a distance. As dusk began to paint the sky in hues of orange and purple, they decided to make camp near the stream, within sight of the strange orb, but not too close. David fashioned makeshift shelters from large leaves and branches, while Michael tried to start a fire. Emily, meanwhile, sat quietly, clutching her notebook. "I can't remember my parents' faces," she said suddenly, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. "I know their names are Susan and Tom, but I can't picture them. Not really. It's like looking at a blurred photograph." Jessica gasped, tears welling in her eyes. "Oh, Emily, I'm so sorry." But Michael saw the fear in Jessica's own eyes. He knew she was testing herself, desperately trying to conjure images of her own brother, Mark. He tried to think of his sister, Sarah, her laugh, the way she crinkled her nose when she was annoyed. The details were slipping, dissolving like sugar in water. It was like watching a beloved photograph slowly fade to white. "We need to stay calm," David said, his voice strained. "Panicking won't help. We need a plan. We need to figure out what these things are, and how to get off this island." But what plan could they make when their very ability to plan, to remember crucial information, was being systematically dismantled? Michael finally managed to get a small fire going, its flickering flames offering a meager comfort against the encroaching darkness and the growing dread. The hum from the orb seemed to intensify with the night, a low, resonant pulse that vibrated through the earth itself. As the hours dragged on, each of them found themselves staring into the fire, lost in their own deteriorating minds. Michael tried to recall a complex algorithm he'd been working on, a project he was passionate about. He could remember the concept, the desire to build it, but the intricate steps, the lines of code, had become a jumbled mess. It was like trying to read a book where every other word had been erased. Jessica, restless, got up and walked towards the edge of their makeshift camp, peering into the shadows. "I feel like I've been here before," she whispered, her voice laced with a strange, unsettling familiarity. "This exact spot. The smell of these flowers. It's like a dream I can almost grasp." Michael felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. Had she? Or was the island planting false memories, or distorting their existing ones? The thought was even more terrifying than simply losing them. He got up and joined her, looking out into the impenetrable darkness. "It's just the stress, Jessica. Your mind playing tricks." He tried to reassure her, but his own words felt hollow. Suddenly, a faint metallic scraping sound echoed from deeper within the jungle, distinct from the usual night sounds. It was a deliberate, rhythmic rasp, like something heavy being dragged across stone. "Did you hear that?" Emily whispered, her head snapping up. David was instantly alert, grabbing a sturdy branch. "What was that?" The sound came again, closer this time. Scrape, scrape, scrape. It was slow, deliberate, and undeniably mechanical. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't the wind. It was something large, something unnatural, moving through the dense jungle towards them. Their eyes met in the firelight, reflecting a primal fear. They had stumbled onto an island that not only stole their past but seemed to possess a present that was far more sinister than they could have imagined. The monolith on the beach, the humming orb in the clearing, and now this unseen, scraping horror approaching through the darkness. They were not alone, and whatever was out there, it was coming for them. The island wasn't just erasing their memories. It was actively hunting them, or perhaps preparing them for something far worse. The question of why now burned with a new terrifying urgency. The heavy metal door shuddered again, a metallic shriek tearing through the silence. Michael and David braced against it, their muscles straining, sweat beading on their foreheads. Outside, the unseen force slammed into the reinforced steel, a monstrous thud that vibrated through their very bones. Emily let out a strangled cry, shrinking back against the grimy wall, her eyes wide with unadulterated terror. Jessica, her face pale, fumbled with the rusted bolts of an old locking mechanism she'd spotted next to the door frame. Her fingers, trembling, finally found purchase, and with a grunt, she shoved a thick, corroded bar into place. The sound of the bolt clicking home was a small, fragile victory against the unseen horror outside. Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. The kind that presses in on your ears, making your own heartbeat sound like a drum solo. They stood there, frozen, listening. For another crash, another shriek, another sign that whatever was out there hadn't given up. But there was nothing. Just the gentle hum of the building's ancient, barely functioning ventilation system, and their own ragged breaths. What was that? Emily finally whispered, her voice barely audible. Michael pushed himself away from the door, his chest heaving. I don't know. Felt powerful. Not an animal. Not a storm. He looked at David, who was still leaning against the door, his head bowed. David slowly straightened, running a hand through his hair. It felt deliberate, like it was trying to break in, to get us. Jessica walked towards a flickering incandescent bulb hanging precariously from the ceiling, its weak glow doing little to dispel the gloom. It was watching us. I felt it. Before the scream, before it hit the door. I felt eyes on us from the jungle. A shiver ran down Michael's spine. The idea that something intelligent, something malevolent, was hunting them was far more terrifying than a mindless beast. We need to find out what this place is, what it was used for. There has to be something here, some answers. The room they were in was a small antechamber, leading into a larger, darker space. Old, dusty filing cabinets lined one wall, several of them overturned, their contents spilled across the floor. Faded folders, brittle paper, odd, unidentifiable metal components. A strong, sterile odor like old chemicals mixed with damp earth hung heavy in the air. They moved cautiously, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. The main room was clearly a laboratory. Stainless steel workbenches streaked with rust stood in rows. Broken beakers and test tubes littered the floor, glinting ominously in the weak light. A large, complex piece of machinery, covered in an opaque tarp, dominated the center of the room. Look! Jessica pointed to a whiteboard on the far wall. It was mostly erased, but faint, scribbled equations and diagrams were still visible beneath the dust. One word, circled repeatedly, stood out: amnesia. Michael felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. Amnesia. The very thing they were experiencing. This wasn't just a random abandoned facility. This was directly connected. David pulled a dusty logbook from a shelf. Its cover was a faded, institutional green. He flipped it open, the pages stiff and yellowed. It's our research log, dated decades ago. Project Chimera. Emily gasped. Chimera? Like the mythical beast? A mix of different animals? Or a genetic experiment? Michael muttered, his mind racing. He remembered fragments of a conversation they'd had earlier about the strange wildlife on the island. Was it possible? David began to read aloud, his voice low and strained. Entry 147. Subject Delta 3 showing accelerated cognitive degradation. Memory recall decreasing exponentially. Initial neural scans confirm synaptic decay consistent with exposure to environmental factor X. Hypothesis. Factor X acts as a localized, highly targeted neurological disruptor, primarily affecting hippocampal function. Jessica leaned in, her brow furrowed. Environmental factor X? What does that even mean? Hippocampal function, Michael repeated, a spark of recognition in his eyes. That's the part of the brain responsible for memory formation, learning, spatial navigation. This isn't just random memory loss. It's a targeted attack on their brains. David continued, flipping pages. Entry 152. Delta 3 now completely unresponsive. Attempts to reverse degradation unsuccessful. Ethical concerns raised by Dr. Ramirez. Project lead Dr. Aris insists on continuation, citing unprecedented potential for cognitive repatterning. Cognitive repatterning. The words hung in the air, chilling them to the bone. What kind of repatterning? And why? Suddenly, Emily clutched her head, a small whimper escaping her lips. My head. It's like static. I can't remember what we were just talking about. Something about a project. Her eyes darted around, confused, lost. A wave of fear washed over Jessica. It was happening faster now. Not just the long-term memories but the short-term, the immediate past. Emily, it's Project Chimera. We just found a logbook about memory loss. Emily blinked, her gaze unfocused. Oh, right. Chimera. She repeated it slowly, as if tasting the words for the first time. What were we doing before we came in here? Michael felt a surge of panic. Emily, we were attacked. Something tried to break down the door. Emily frowned, her brow furrowing in concentration. Attacked? By what? I don't remember. The air grew heavy with unspoken dread. The memory loss wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a weapon. One that was slowly, inexorably stripping them of their ability to understand, to react, to even remember the danger they were in. David slammed the logbook shut, his face grim. This is worse than we thought. They were experimenting on people, on memories, and whatever Factor X is, it's still active. It's affecting us. He looked around the desolate lab. We need to find Factor X, or how to stop it, before we all end up like Delta 3. Jessica's eyes fell upon the tarp-covered machinery in the center of the room. It was large, almost like a medical imaging device, but with strange, archaic components. Curious, she reached out and pulled back a corner of the tarp. Beneath it, a complex array of wires, coils, and what looked like a large, crystal-like emitter pulsed with a faint internal blue light. It hummed softly, a low, almost imperceptible thrum that filled the room. What is this? She murmured, transfixed. Michael stepped closer, his eyes scanning the intricate design. It looks like some kind of neural interface, or a projector of some sort. He saw faded labels on a control panel: cerebral inducer, pattern modulator, memory resequence. David peered over his shoulder, his breath catching in his throat. Memory resequence? They weren't just erasing memories, they were changing them, or implanting new ones. The horrifying implications slammed into them. The island wasn't just a natural phenomenon causing amnesia. This was a deliberate scientific endeavor. Someone decades ago had built this machine, this facility, to manipulate the very fabric of human consciousness. But why? Emily asked, her voice stronger now, though her eyes still held a flicker of confusion. Why would anyone do this? Before anyone could answer, a low guttural growl vibrated through the floorboards. It wasn't the metallic shriek from before, but something deeper, more primal. It came from inside the building. They froze, their heads snapping towards the dark corridor leading deeper into the facility. The blue light from the machine pulsed faster, its hum intensifying, almost like a heartbeat. Did you hear that? Michael whispered, his hand instinctively reaching for the heavy wrench he'd picked up earlier. The growl came again, closer this time, followed by the distinct sound of something heavy dragging across the concrete floor. Thump, scrape, thump, scrape. Moving slowly, deliberately towards them, Emily let out a small, terrified gasp, her eyes fixed on the darkness. It's coming from in there. What if it's one of their subjects? The thought was horrifying. A human, or what was left of one, twisted and broken by these experiments, roaming the halls. The memory loss suddenly felt like a mercy compared to what cognitive repatterning might have truly meant for Delta 3. David gripped Jessica's arm, his knuckles white. We need to move. Now. If that thing is what they were experimenting on, we don't want to meet it. But where could they go? The only exit was the front door, still bolted, but the unseen entity outside was waiting. They were trapped between a monstrous, unknown hunter in the jungle and whatever horror lurked in the depths of this abandoned lab. As the dragging sound grew louder, a chilling realization struck Jessica. The faint blue light from the cerebral inducer was casting long, distorted shadows across the lab. And for a split second, as the growl echoed, she saw it. A shadow flicker at the end of the corridor, impossibly tall, impossibly thin, moving with a strange, disjointed gait. It was almost human-like, but grotesquely elongated, like a caricature of a person stretched beyond recognition. Then just as quickly it vanished back into the gloom. "It's not just a subject," Jessica breathed, her voice barely a whisper. "It's what they made." The hum of the machine intensified, the blue light now pulsing with a frantic rhythm. The air crackled with an unseen energy, and a new, more profound sense of dread settled over them. They weren't just on an island that erased memories. They were in a forgotten prison, and the inmates, or rather the experiments, were still very much alive. The question of why now merged with a terrifying new one. What else had they created here, and what did it want with them? The island was a trap, and the bait was their minds. The island was a trap, and the bait was their minds. The chilling revelation that the facility was not merely a tomb, but a living, breathing prison for distorted human consciousness, clawed at their throats. David felt a cold dread seep into his bones, a fear far more profound than any he'd experienced before. This wasn't just a deserted lab. It was a horror show in progress. Emily, her face pale, clutched her arms, eyes darting into the oppressive darkness that now seemed to hold 1,000 unseen eyes. They're still here," she whispered, the words barely audible above the frantic beat of her own heart. "What are they?" Michael, ever the pragmatist despite the terror, quickly toggled his flashlight, sweeping it across the rusted bars of the cells. "And how are they still here? These records were decades old. Unless..." He trailed off, the implication hanging heavy in the stagnant air. Unless the experiments were ongoing. A low guttural moan echoed from deeper within the complex. Not human, not animal, but something warped and sorrowful. It reverberated through the very structure of the building, vibrating in their chest cavities. It wasn't a sound of aggression, but of profound, endless suffering. It was the sound of a mind lost, yet stubbornly clinging to existence. David knew they couldn't stay, but he also knew they couldn't leave. Not yet. The why was no longer a philosophical question. It was a desperate plea for understanding. "We need to find out what happened here." "What is happening here?" he stated, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hands. "If they're alive, there has to be a reason. A controller. A purpose." They moved, a silent, terrified unit, deeper into the bowels of the research facility. The air grew heavier, thick with the metallic tang of old blood and something else, something clinical and unsettling, like ozone mixed with decay. The cells eventually gave way to a series of laboratories, their equipment still largely intact, though coated in a thick layer of dust. Wires snaked across floors, connecting antiquated machines that hummed faintly, as if still drawing power from some hidden source. Michael immediately gravitated towards a console, its screen dark but not entirely dead. "If I can get this online, maybe there are logs," he muttered, pulling out a small device from his pack. His fingers flew across the keyboard, a desperate dance against the encroaching darkness. While Michael worked, Emily and David explored the lab. Tables were littered with faded schematics, complex diagrams depicting neural pathways and brain structures. One diagram, meticulously drawn, showed a human brain with specific regions highlighted, accompanied by annotations in a precise, almost clinical script. Memory recall suppressed, emotional response stabilized, cognitive function altered. It wasn't about erasing memories, David realized with a fresh wave of horror. It was about re-engineering them. Then Emily gasped, pointing to a series of large cylindrical tanks lining one wall, partially obscured by shadow. Each tank was filled with a murky, amber liquid, and within each something floated. Not bodies, not entirely. They were organic, certainly vaguely humanoid in shape, but distorted, elongated, with faint tendrils reaching out, almost like roots. Each one was connected by dozens of thick cables to a central panel, which in turn pulsed with a faint rhythmic glow. "What are those?" Emily whispered, her voice barely a breath. David stared, his mind struggling to process the grotesque display. These weren't the experiments they had heard moaning. These were something else entirely. They were harvested, cultivated. Suddenly, Michael let out a sharp intake of breath. "I'm in," he exclaimed, swiveling the monitor towards them. The screen flickered to life, displaying lines of data, dates, and entries. "It's a project log. Project Chimera." The word sent a shiver down David's spine. Chimera, a monster made of disparate parts. Michael scrolled rapidly, his eyes scanning the technical jargon. Okay, this is beyond anything I've ever seen. They weren't just erasing memories. They were isolating them, extracting them. He paused, his brow furrowed in concentration. Look at this. Subject 734, Memory Stream Analysis Complete. Emotional Resonance Profile. High. Integration into Storage Matrix. Successful. Emily's eyes widened in horror. Storage matrix? What does that even mean? It means, David said, his voice hoarse, that the memories weren't just wiped, they were taken. And those things in the tanks. He gestured towards the horrifying cylinders. They're not the patients, they're the memories themselves. Or their physical manifestations. The idea was so outlandish, so utterly terrifying that it almost sounded like madness. But here on this forgotten island, surrounded by the remnants of a monstrous experiment, it felt sickeningly plausible. Michael continued to scroll, his face paling with each passing entry. It says here, the erased memories, particularly those with high emotional charge, had a unique energy signature. They could be harvested, and then repurposed. The word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken dread. What could memories, specifically stolen memories, be repurposed for? Just then, a faint rhythmic pulse began to emanate from the central panel connected to the tanks. It was a soft, almost imperceptible thrum at first, then it grew stronger, vibrating through the floor. The amber liquid in the tanks began to swirl, and the grotesque forms within them seemed to writhe, as if waking from a long slumber. What's happening? Emily cried, recoiling. The log mentions memory activation cycles, Michael stammered, his eyes glued to the screen. They're not just stored, they're periodically activated. As he spoke, the forms in the tanks began to glow with a faint internal light, like bioluminescent deep-sea creatures. The tendrils thrashed gently, and the vaguely humanoid shapes seemed to coalesce, gaining a disturbing clarity. David could almost make out features on some of them. Twisted, agonized faces, forever frozen in silent screams. And then, almost imperceptibly, a sound began to emerge from the tanks. It wasn't the guttural moan from the cells. This was different. It was a cacophony of whispers, overlaid and distorted, like 1,000 voices speaking at once, yet none distinguishable. It was the sound of a crowd, but a crowd of ghosts, each voice a fragment of a stolen life. It's their memories, Emily whispered, tears welling in her eyes. All those people, their lives trapped in these things. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, swirling around them like an invisible vortex. They were no longer just sounds, they were presences. David felt a strange pressure in his own head, a faint hum that resonated with the cacophony from the tanks. It felt like his own thoughts were being gently but firmly probed. Michael suddenly cried out, pointing at the screen. Look, the latest entry. It's recent. Just a few days ago. The screen displayed a new log, stark against the older entries. Asterisk Project Chimera Phase 2. Subject acquisition successful. Initial memory mapping complete. Target: deep emotional connections. Primary objective: energy harvesting. Secondary objective: subliminal influence. Commencing integration protocols. Expected output: enhanced psychic resonance. Current status: active. Asterisk. Subject acquisition: deep emotional connections. Psychic resonance. Before they could fully process the terrifying implications, the rhythmic pulsing from the central panel intensified. The glowing forms in the tanks thrashed violently, and the cacophony of whispers surged into an overwhelming roar, a psychic scream that tore through the air, piercing their very minds. David felt a sharp, agonizing pain in his temples, as if a spike were being driven into his skull. Emily stumbled, clutching her head, a strangled cry escaping her lips. Michael fell back from the console, his hands clamped over his ears, his face contorted in agony. The whispers were no longer just whispers. They were invading their thoughts, flooding their minds with alien sensations, fragmented images, and raw, unfiltered emotions that were not their own. A flash of a child's laughter, the warmth of a forgotten lover's touch, the sting of betrayal, the crushing weight of grief. All of it washed over them, a tidal wave of stolen consciousness. It was an assault, a psychic bombardment, and it was deliberately targeting their most vulnerable defenses, their minds. Through the unbearable mental static, a single clear thought, alien and cold, somehow seeped into David's consciousness, not in words, but as a chilling, undeniable realization. The experiments in the cells, the ones moaning in the darkness, were the shells of those whose memories had been harvested. They were what was left when the essence of a person was ripped away. And the things in the tanks were not just stored memories, they were the weapon, the source of the island's power, its true purpose. And now, that weapon was actively turning on them. The island wasn't just erasing memories, it was consuming them, and it was hungry for more. It was hungry for theirs. The chilling realization settled over them like a shroud woven from the island's own oppressive humidity. This wasn't a natural phenomenon. It was a deliberate, malevolent force. The plants weren't just a symptom of the island's peculiar nature. They were the weapon, the source of the island's power, its true purpose. And now, that weapon was actively turning on them. The island wasn't just erasing memories, it was consuming them, and it was hungry for more. It was hungry for theirs. A low, almost imperceptible hum began to thrum beneath their feet, a vibration that seemed to resonate directly in their teeth. The glowing flora around them, which had previously pulsed with a gentle, hypnotic rhythm, now flared with an aggressive, almost angry intensity. The luminescence brightened, casting their faces in stark, shifting hues of emerald and sapphire. It was as if the island itself had heard Michael's desperate pronouncement and was now confirming its sinister intent. "It's accelerating," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible above the rising hum. She clutched her head, her eyes wide with a fear that wasn't just for her life, but for her very identity. I can't remember what we were doing just a moment ago. Why are we standing here?" Her gaze darted between Michael, Jessica, and David, a flicker of confusion clouding her features. Who are you again?" The question hung in the air, a cruel echo of their deepest fears. Jessica gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. David, who had been relatively stable until now, stumbled back, his eyes unfocused. "Emily, it's Michael," Jessica said, her voice shaking. "And I'm Jessica. David, we're trying to find a way out." But Emily just stared blankly, a nascent panic building in her eyes. It was happening faster than ever before. The island was no longer content with the slow, insidious erosion. It was actively devouring their minds, picking them clean like vultures stripping a carcass. Michael's scientific mind, despite the encroaching fog, desperately tried to grasp the mechanism. "It's not just an emission," he muttered, more to himself than to the others. "It's an absorption. These plants, they're not just causing memory loss. They're feeding on it. On the neural energy, the synaptic connections. They're like organic processors, consuming our consciousness." He looked at the vibrant, deadly flora. The island is a living organism, and we're its prey, its food source. The hum intensified, vibrating through their bones. The air grew thick, heavy, almost viscous. The glowing spores, previously a subtle shimmer, now seemed to swirl visibly around them, a glittering, deadly dust. They were breathing it in, absorbing it through their skin. Every breath was a step closer to oblivion. "We have to move," Jessica urged, her voice laced with a raw desperation. "We can't just stand here. What's the closest point of escape? The highest point? A cave? Anything." She looked to Michael, her usual strength faltering under the weight of the invisible assault. Michael forced himself to focus, fighting against the creeping numbness in his own mind. The highest point, the summit. Maybe the air is clearer there. Or, if there's any sort of structure, an antenna, a signal, we have to try. He pointed towards the dimly visible peak of the island, shrouded in a perpetual mist that now seemed to glow faintly from within. "That way. It's our only chance." As they began to move, stumbling over exposed roots and slick, glowing moss, the environment seemed to actively resist them. Vines, previously dormant, now seemed to twitch and sway, brushing against their legs with an unnerving sentience. The air itself felt heavier, almost pushing them back. The glowing spores increased in density, clinging to their clothes, their hair, making them feel as though they were being slowly absorbed into the very fabric of the island. "My head, it feels like it's buzzing," David mumbled, swaying on his feet. He reached out, grabbing Michael's arm for support. "I keep forgetting what we're doing. Where are we going? Is Sarah? Is she with us?" His eyes, once sharp and observant, were now clouded with a profound disorientation. The mention of Sarah, the one they had already lost, was a cruel reminder of their fate. "No, David," Jessica said gently, tears welling in her eyes. Sarah, she's gone. We have to keep going. We have to get off this island. The path to the summit was steep and treacherous, made more so by their rapidly deteriorating mental state. Each step was a battle not just against the terrain, but against their own minds. Michael found himself repeating their objective aloud, over and over, like a mantra to ward off the encroaching void. Summit. Clear air. Escape. Summit. Clear air. Escape. He realized with a jolt of terror that he was relying more and more on his instincts, his ingrained survival mechanisms, rather than conscious thought. His memories of specific scientific principles, of past experiences, were becoming frayed, like old photographs fading in the sun. He could feel the edges of his identity blurring. Suddenly, Emily, who had been trailing slightly behind, let out a sharp cry. She had tripped, falling onto a patch of particularly vibrant, glowing moss. As she scrambled up, brushing her hands on her pants, a strange, almost shimmering residue clung to her skin. Her eyes darted around, completely lost. Where am I? What is this place? Who are you people? Her voice was laced with pure, unadulterated fear, the kind of fear born from total oblivion. It wasn't just a lapse, it was a complete reset. She was a blank slate, terrified and alone, surrounded by strangers in a place she didn't recognize. Jessica rushed to her, trying to comfort her, but Emily recoiled, her primal fear overriding any sense of connection. Don't touch me. Stay away. Michael felt a surge of cold dread. Emily was gone. Her personality, her memories, her very self had been consumed. She was physically present, but the person they knew was utterly lost. This was the island's ultimate victory, and it was happening before their eyes. We can't leave her, Jessica pleaded, tears streaming down her face. Not like this. We have to, Michael said, his voice raw with the pain he hadn't known he still possessed. We can't help her now. We have to save ourselves or we'll all end up like her. Or worse. He pulled Jessica away, forcing her to abandon their friend to a terrifying, living void. It was the hardest decision he had ever made, a betrayal that would haunt any memory he might manage to retain. As they continued their desperate ascent, the glowing plants seemed to grow thicker, their tendrils reaching out, their light pulsating with an almost predatory rhythm. The air was now thick with the shimmering, memory-eating spores. Michael felt a strange, tingling sensation on his skin, as if countless tiny needles were pricking him. He suddenly remembered a fragment of a lecture he once attended, about bioluminescent fungi that communicate through light pulses and chemical signals. But this was far beyond anything natural. The summit was closer now, but the climb was agonizing. David was barely conscious, muttering to himself, his eyes vacant. Jessica was sobbing quietly, her body trembling with exhaustion and fear. Michael pushed them forward, his own mind a battlefield against the encroaching emptiness. He knew he was forgetting things, important things, but he couldn't grasp what they were. The only thing that remained clear was the primal urge to survive, to escape this hellish place. Finally, they stumbled onto a relatively flat clearing near the peak. The air here was different, slightly less dense with the glowing spores, though the ground was still covered in the insidious, pulsating flora. But what truly stopped them cold was what lay at the very center of the clearing. It wasn't a natural formation. It was a structure, half buried and overgrown with the same glowing plants, yet undeniably artificial. A massive obsidian-like monolith, perfectly smooth and impossibly dark, rose from the earth, its surface reflecting the emerald glow of the surrounding vegetation like a distorted mirror. It hummed with an energy far more powerful than the plants, a deep, resonant thrum that vibrated through their very bones, rattling their teeth. The monolith wasn't just reflecting the light, it seemed to be absorbing it, drawing the luminescence from the plants into its dark, enigmatic surface. And as it absorbed, the plants around it pulsed even more intensely, as if feeding it, empowering it. This wasn't just a natural phenomenon. This was a machine, a device. And it was ancient, powerful, and terrifyingly active. The island wasn't merely a living organism. It was a vast, intricate system, and this monolith was its heart, the true engine of its destructive power. As Michael stared at the impossible structure, a terrifying realization bloomed in his rapidly fading mind. The plants were the weapon, yes, but this was the operator, the source of the island's malevolent will. And it wasn't just consuming memories, it was collecting them, storing them. For what purpose he couldn't begin to fathom. A sudden excruciating surge of energy emanated from the monolith, a wave of pure, concentrated mental static that slammed into their minds. David crumpled to the ground, unconscious. Jessica screamed, clutching her head, her body seizing. Michael felt a blinding white light erupt behind his eyes, a sensation of being physically ripped apart from the inside. And then a voice, not a sound heard with his ears, but a thought projected directly into his mind, clear and chillingly coherent, even as his own thoughts dissolved into chaos. It was ancient, vast, and utterly devoid of emotion. "Welcome," the voice echoed in the void of his mind, "to the archive." The words resonated not in his ears, but in the very core of his evaporating consciousness. "Welcome," the voice echoed in the void of his mind, "to the archive." Michael struggled to grasp the meaning, to form a coherent thought, but his mind was a shattered mirror, reflecting only fragments of what he once was. Yet the voice, this immense ancient presence, was a singular, undeniable truth in the swirling chaos. It was not speaking to him, but through him, within him. It was a vast, cold intelligence, older than any star Michael had ever seen, and it held the remnants of his identity in its ethereal grip. "Your species calls it memory," the voice continued, a ripple in the fabric of his fading thoughts. "A fragile construct, easily lost, easily manipulated, but here it is preserved, catalogued, understood." Michael felt a strange sensation, not of sight but of knowing. He was suddenly aware of an infinite expanse, a library without walls, a tapestry woven from every thought, every emotion, every experience ever lived on this island. It wasn't just human memories, it was the whisper of ancient trees, the echo of forgotten birds, the deep, slow pulse of the earth itself. He was immersed in a sea of consciousness, a collective unconsciousness so vast it dwarfed any individual mind into insignificance. "The island is a conduit," the voice explained, its tone devoid of explanation, simply stating fact. "A filter. It draws in the ephemeral, the personal, the fleeting, and distills it, transforms it, from individual experience into pure data, pure knowledge." Horror, a raw primal dread, pierced through Michael's mental fog. This was why people lost their memories. This was the island's true purpose. It wasn't a curse, it was a cosmic vacuum cleaner, sucking the very essence of human experience into this boundless archive. His own memories, the faces of Jessica, David, Emily, the scent of his childhood home, the sound of his mother's laugh, they weren't gone. They were here, somewhere in this unimaginable repository, stripped of their personal meaning, reduced to entries in an endless cosmic ledger. "You possess a unique resonance," the voice revealed, a faint tremor, almost like curiosity, in its otherwise flat delivery. "A strength of will, a resistance. Most succumb entirely. Their individual data is absorbed, assimilated. You remain partially coherent. A rare anomaly." Michael tried to scream, but he had no throat. He tried to fight, but he had no body. He was a disembodied consciousness, a flickering ember in the shadow of a cosmic bonfire. He understood now. The visions, the dreams, the sense of being watched, it wasn't a hallucination. It was the archive reaching out, sampling, absorbing. "We have observed your species for millennia," the voice continued, a slow, deliberate unfolding of cosmic history. "A fascinating yet volatile experiment. Your capacity for creation, for destruction. Your fleeting lives filled with such intense, yet often contradictory experiences. A rich harvest." Harvest. The word chilled him to his core. He was livestock. Humanity was livestock. The island was a farm. Suddenly, images flickered through his mind. Not his own, but vivid alien memories. He saw ancient civilizations rise and fall on other islands, similar conduits scattered across the globe, each silently collecting the psychic residue of living beings. He saw beings, not unlike himself, standing on those shores, their minds dissolving, their identities becoming one with the vast, unfeeling intellect of the archive. He saw the birth of stars, the slow drift of galaxies, the endless, grinding march of time, all from the perspective of this entity, this collective consciousness that had witnessed it all. He saw the first human steps on this very island millennia ago. Not his footsteps, but the initial tentative explorations of early humans. He saw their wonder, their fear, their eventual surrender to the island's peculiar influence. He saw them build homes, raise families, create art, all while the island subtly siphoned their essence, enriching the archive with every passing generation. He saw the entity's own origin, a concept so profound it almost shattered the fragile remnants of his mind. It wasn't born, it simply was. A fundamental aspect of the universe, a sentient information field that had existed since the first spark of consciousness appeared anywhere in the cosmos. It didn't have a name, a form, or a purpose beyond its own existence as a repository of all experience. The island serves a dual function, the voice explained, pulling him back from the dizzying cosmic visions. It collects, yes, but it also protects. From what, you ask? From the very chaos it seeks to understand. Your species, in its pursuit of knowledge, often stumbles upon truths it is not equipped to handle. The archive ensures that certain knowledge, certain paths, remain inaccessible. Michael felt a surge of adrenaline, a desperate attempt to reclaim his sanity. Inaccessible? What knowledge? What truths? Was the memory erasure not just about collection but about suppression? Was there something the archive didn't want humanity to remember? Your friend David, the voice interjected, a sudden sharp shift in focus that jolted Michael. He sought to understand the island's mechanism. He came too close. His mind became a conduit, unfiltered. The information flowed into him raw, undigested. It fractured him. David, the broken man in the cave, the one who had spoken of the truth before his mind collapsed. He hadn't just lost his memories, he had been overwhelmed by the sheer volume of the archive's contents. He had glimpsed the cosmic truth, and it had shattered his human brain. And Jessica, the voice continued, its focus now on his partner. Her connection to you is strong, a unique bond. It has allowed her to resist the full assimilation. She senses the truth but cannot fully perceive it. She is a distraction, a variable. Jessica was in danger. His last coherent thought was a desperate plea for her safety. He had to warn her. He had to get back to her. But he was trapped, a ghost in the machine, his own mind dissolving into the very archive he now understood. Your presence here is not accidental, Michael, the voice stated, a new, unsettling resonance entering its tone. Your resistance, your unique mental signature has been noted. For a long time we have sought a more direct interface, a bridge between the individual and the collective. You, Michael, are a candidate. A candidate for what? The word sent a fresh wave of terror through him. Not just assimilation, but something more. A tool? A vessel? He felt a strange pulling sensation, a deepening suction, as if the last remnants of his individual self were being stretched thin, prepared for an unknown transformation. The island is not merely a collector, the voice elaborated, a chilling finality in its pronouncements. It is a guardian, and sometimes guardians must take active measures to ensure the balance, to prevent the species from destroying itself with knowledge it cannot comprehend. Michael's vision, or what passed for it, swam with images of humanity's destructive tendencies, its wars, its environmental ravages, its relentless pursuit of power. Was the archive, in its cold, detached way, trying to save humanity by limiting its knowledge, by erasing the memories of certain truths? Was this benevolent control, or simply a more sophisticated form of imprisonment? He tried to fight, to push back against the overwhelming presence, to claw his way back to his own mind, to Jessica. He focused on her face, on her laugh, on the feeling of her hand in his. These were his anchors, his last remaining defenses against the encroaching void. Resistance is inefficient, the voice observed, a hint of something akin to impatience, or perhaps just a logical assessment of his futile struggle. Your purpose is greater than your individual self. Embrace the collective. Become the knowledge. A profound sense of inevitability washed over him. He was losing. The island, the archive, this ancient entity, it was too vast, too powerful. His individual consciousness was a tiny spark against an infinite darkness. He felt his anchors slipping, Jessica's face blurring, her laugh fading into the cacophony of a million other forgotten sounds. Then a new sensation. Not a voice, but a pressure. A gentle, yet irresistible force guiding him, showing him. It was pulling him deeper, not just into the archive, but through it. He was moving through layers of information, through epochs of time, through the very fabric of existence. He saw glimpses of future possibilities, branching realities, paths humanity might take. Some glorious, some horrific. He saw the entity making subtle adjustments, nudging events, erasing memories here, preserving knowledge there, all to steer the course of humanity away from self-destruction. It was a cosmic shepherd, and humanity was its flock. But then amidst the vastness, a flicker. A memory. Not his own, but one he had seen before in a dream, in a vision. The symbol. The intricate, swirling pattern he had carved into the cave wall. It wasn't just a pattern, it was a key. A unique signature within the archive itself. "You have found it," the voice acknowledged, a rare hint of something almost like surprise. The anomaly within the anomaly. The echo of a previous attempt. Previous attempt? What did that mean? Had someone else long ago also been a candidate? Had they also resisted? And what had happened to them? The implications were terrifying. He focused on the symbol, pulling on it with the last vestiges of his will. It felt like a thread, a single fragile string leading out of the labyrinth. He wasn't just a repository of memories, he was a key. And the archive, in its infinite wisdom, had just shown him how to unlock something within itself. Perhaps even how to escape. But escaping the archive might mean escaping the island, and if the island was a guardian, what horrors lay beyond its protective, memory-erasing grasp? What truths was it so desperately trying to keep from humanity? The voice, for the first time, fell silent, its vast intelligence perhaps momentarily focused on this unexpected turn. Michael felt a surge of cold dread, mixed with a desperate, burgeoning hope. He had a weapon now, a secret within the secret. But using it would mean plunging headfirst into a darkness even the archive deemed too dangerous to remember. Michael's fingers trembled as he finally bypassed the final encryption. The screen flickered, then resolved into a cascade of data. Not just text, but intricate diagrams, psychological profiles, and a chillingly precise flowchart. It wasn't merely memory erasure. It was reconstruction. The island wasn't a sanctuary for the forgetful. It was a factory for new identities, new lives, meticulously crafted and deployed. He scrolled, a cold knot forming in his stomach. The files detailed the process. Phase 1, the gentle erosion of past trauma and personal history. Phase 2, the careful assessment of latent aptitudes and vulnerabilities. Phase 3, the implantation. Not just new memories, but entirely new skill sets, new loyalties, new purpose. These individuals weren't being healed. They were being weaponized. Then he saw it. A ledger. Thousands of entries. Original names, aliases, assigned roles. High-ranking politicians, corporate executives, scientists, artists, all processed, all given new directives, subtly woven into the fabric of society. The archive hadn't deemed this too dangerous to remember for them, but for everyone else. For the world outside, blissfully unaware that influential figures were merely puppets on invisible strings. Their past selves dissolved into the island's digital abyss. He searched frantically, his heart a drum against his ribs. Emily. He typed her name, his breath catching. And there it was. Her original profile alongside a new one. A detailed blueprint of the woman she was meant to become. Not a lost soul, not a patient, but an asset. Her new identity was tied to a sophisticated data analysis firm. A company with deep ties to global infrastructure. She wouldn't just be forgotten. She would be repurposed to serve the very architects of this horrifying scheme. The depth of the betrayal, the sheer audacity of it, threatened to overwhelm him. This was the weapon. This was the darkness. A single encrypted data chip, small enough to fit in his palm, containing the irrefutable evidence. A complete manifest of the island's true purpose and its horrifying reach. It was the ultimate key. A truth so devastating it could dismantle empires. But first he had to get it out. A sudden sharp ping echoed through the silent archive, followed by a low, insistent hum. A red indicator light flashed above the terminal. He triggered an alert. They knew. He ripped the chip from the slot, shoving it deep into a pocket. The hum intensified, a mechanical groan from the very walls. Emergency lights flickered on, casting long, distorted shadows. He could hear distant shouts, the thud of heavy boots approaching. The hidden door, his only way out, was at the far end of the chamber. He bolted, adrenaline surging through his veins. The air grew thick with the metallic tang of ozone. From the far end of the archive, a heavy blast door began to descend, slowly, inexorably, sealing off the chamber. He had mere seconds. He dove, rolling under the descending barrier just as it slammed shut with a deafening clang, shaking the very foundations of the tunnel. He was in the labyrinthine network of service tunnels now, the same tunnels he'd navigated to reach the archive. But now they were alive with danger. Sirens began to wail, a mournful rising shriek that echoed through the confined spaces. Lights flashed erratically, strobing through the darkness, disorienting him. He could hear voices distorted by the concrete, closing in from multiple directions. He remembered the old, cracked map Emily had left, the one he'd found in the hidden compartment. It showed not just the general layout, but specific maintenance access points, long forgotten by the current staff. He needed to be unpredictable. He needed to disappear into the very fabric of the island's forgotten infrastructure. He scrambled through a narrow ventilation shaft, dust and grime coating his face, the sound of the sirens a relentless hammer against his skull. The shaft led him to a forgotten utility corridor, a tangle of pipes and wires. He could hear guards shouting his name, their voices growing closer, their flashlights cutting through the gloom. He pressed himself against a cold pipe, holding his breath, his heart threatening to burst from his chest. A team of guards clad in dark uniforms, their faces grim, stormed past his hiding spot, their heavy boots echoing on the concrete. They were moving with a chilling efficiency, clearly well trained. They knew he was here. They knew he had something. He waited until their footsteps faded, then emerged, moving with a desperate urgency. He knew the general direction of the surface, but the direct routes would be swarming. He had to find an unused exit, something off the beaten path. He remembered a cryptic note in the archive about decommissioned conduits leading to the island's old power station, a place deemed too unstable for regular use. It was a long shot, but it was his only shot. He plunged deeper into the forgotten sections, the air growing heavier, smelling of damp earth and disused machinery. The sounds of the alert faded slightly, replaced by the rhythmic thrum of distant generators. He was moving away from the central facility, deeper into the island's decaying underbelly. Suddenly, a voice boomed from behind him, amplified and chillingly calm. "Michael, stop right there. You've accessed classified information. You've compromised the integrity of Project Serenity." He spun around. Standing at the end of the corridor, silhouetted against a flickering emergency light, was a tall, imposing figure. Dr. Silas, the man whose words had once soothed so many, whose gentle demeanor masked a terrifying intellect. He wasn't alone. 2 guards flanked him, their weapons raised. Michael's mind raced. He had the chip. He had the truth. He couldn't let them take it. He couldn't let them take him. Project Serenity? Michael's voice was hoarse, filled with a bitter laugh. "You call this serenity? You're building an army of ghosts, Dr. Silas. You're erasing people and replacing them with puppets." Silas stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "You don't understand the complexities, Michael. The world is chaotic. It needs guidance, needs direction. We offer a path to order. You offer slavery." Michael retorted, glancing around for an escape route. The corridor was a dead end behind Silas. To his left, a rusted metal grate barely holding. To his right, a sheer drop into what looked like a subterranean water reservoir. "A necessary sacrifice for a greater good," Silas said, slowly raising a hand. "Hand over the data, Michael, and we can still offer you a place, a new life, a purpose." The offer was a chilling echo of Emily's fate. Michael snarled, "You won't get it, and you won't get me." He made a split-second decision. With a desperate lunge, he kicked at the rusted grate. It shrieked, tearing from its corroded bolts, revealing a narrow, dark passage beyond. The guards reacted instantly, firing. A searing pain erupted in his shoulder as a projectile grazed him, but he ignored it, scrambling through the opening. He heard Silas's enraged shout, followed by the thud of boots pursuing him. The passage was even narrower than the ventilation shaft, forcing him to crawl on his hands and knees. He could feel the blood seeping through his shirt, a hot, sticky warmth against his skin. But the chip was still secure. The truth was still safe. He emerged into a cavernous space, dimly lit by a few flickering emergency lights. It was the old power station. Massive, silent generators loomed like sleeping giants. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and decay. Below him, a vast, murky pool of water, reflecting the erratic lights like a broken mirror. And across the chasm, a rickety metal catwalk, leading to what looked like an old, disused dock. His ticket off the island. He could hear them entering the passage behind him, He was cornered. Suddenly, the ground vibrated. A low, guttural roar echoed through the chamber, not from the generators, but from something deeper, something organic. The lights flickered violently, plunging the chamber into near darkness, then back to a sickly green glow. Silas's voice, now tinged with a hint of alarm, cut through the din. "No, not this section. The containment field is compromised." Michael didn't know what Silas was talking about, but he wasn't waiting to find out. He launched himself onto the catwalk, the rusty metal groaning under his weight. He could hear the guards behind him, their shouts turning to panicked cries. The roaring intensified, and the floor beneath him shuddered violently. He didn't look back. He just ran, the pain in his shoulder a dull throb, his focus solely on the distant dock. The island, once a tranquil prison, had become a living nightmare, its secrets clawing their way to the surface. He had the truth, a truth that could shatter the world. Now he just had to survive long enough to tell it. His mind raced, calculating, planning. He was out of the archive, but he was still trapped, a tiny wounded animal pursued by a monstrous predator. He clutched the data chip, the weight of its terrifying contents a heavy burden, but also a burning beacon of hope. Emily. He had to find Emily. He had to expose this. The fight had only just begun. Michael, wounded and adrenaline-fueled, knew he couldn't stay in the immediate vicinity of the lab. He needed to disappear into the island's dense interior, giving himself a moment to breathe, to think. The jungle, which had once felt like a beautiful, exotic prison, now offered a twisted kind of sanctuary. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sent a jolt of terror through him, but also sharpened his senses. He moved with a primal urgency, his bare feet slapping against the damp earth, the data chip clutched tightly in his hand, a small cold comfort against his palm. His mind raced, a whirlwind of fragmented plans and desperate hope. Emily. He had to find her. He remembered the layout of the facility, the separate wing for patient recovery, a euphemism he now understood, for memory recalibration. He had to assume she was there, undergoing the very process he'd just witnessed, the very process designed to erase her. The thought sent a fresh wave of panic through him, overriding the pain in his side. He circled back cautiously, using the cover of the thick foliage, heading towards the main complex. The moon, a sliver of silver, offered little light, forcing him to rely on instinct and the faint glow from the facility's distant windows. He heard shouts in the distance, the barking of dogs. They were already searching for him. Time was running out. He found a hidden service tunnel he'd noticed during his brief time as a patient, a tunnel used by maintenance staff. It was dark, claustrophobic, and reeked of mildew and stale air, but it led directly beneath the main facility. He crawled through it, his injured side throbbing with every movement, pushing through the pain, fueled by a singular burning purpose. He imagined Eris's face, cold and calculating, the monster behind the curtain, and it ignited a white-hot rage that gave him strength. Emerging into a dimly lit basement corridor, Michael moved like a ghost. He knew the shifts, the security rotations, the blind spots from his enforced observations. He navigated the labyrinthine hallways, his heart hammering against his ribs, each shadow a potential threat. He passed empty rooms, humming machinery, and finally, a corridor marked rehabilitation wing, authorized personnel only. This had to be it. He found Emily in a sterile white room lying on a bed, and 4 drip in her arm. Her eyes were open, staring blankly at the ceiling. Her face was pale, devoid of the vibrant spark he remembered. His breath caught in his throat. He rushed to her side, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Emily? It's Michael. Can you hear me?" Her eyes slowly turned towards him, unfocused, distant. There was no recognition, no flicker of the warmth he remembered. Just a vacant stare, like looking into a window where the light had gone out. "Michael," she whispered, her voice weak, unfamiliar. Who is Michael?" A crushing wave of despair washed over him. They had done it. They had taken her memories. The monster had stolen her. He felt a profound, gut-wrenching grief, but then a defiant spark. No, not entirely. There was still a chance. He remembered Dr. Eris's words, the recalibration process, the suggestibility. He had to try. He gently took her hand, his thumb stroking her knuckles. "It's me, Emily. We came here together, remember? The vacation. The island. They did something to us. They erased our memories. But I got some of mine back. And I have proof. We have to go. She blinked slowly, her brow furrowing slightly, a tiny ripple in the placid surface of her mind. Vacation? Island? I don't remember. A faint tremor ran through her. My head. It feels fuzzy. Like a dream I can't quite grasp. It's not a dream, Emily, he insisted, his voice gentle but firm, trying to inject a sense of reality into her fractured mind. It's real. And we need to leave this place. It's dangerous. He pulled out the data chip, holding it up. This proves everything. They're wiping people's minds, Emily. Turning them into something else. He saw a flicker, a brief moment of fear in her eyes, a reflection of the primal instinct that even a wiped memory couldn't entirely extinguish. Wiping minds, she repeated, a note of confusion, then a hint of alarm in her voice. That sounds awful. It is, Michael confirmed, his heart aching. But we can fight it. We can get your memories back. We have to trust each other, Emily. Just like we always did. He searched her eyes, desperate for any sign of the woman he loved. Suddenly, the door burst open. 2 burly security guards stood there, weapons raised. Freeze. Michael, hands where I can see them. Michael reacted instantly, pushing Emily behind him, shielding her. He knew he couldn't fight them both, not wounded, not with Emily vulnerable. His eyes darted around the room. A window. Small, high up, but maybe... Don't move, Michael. You're making this worse for yourself. One guard yelled, advancing. Get out of here, Emily. Michael shouted, his voice cracking with urgency. Run. But Emily, disoriented, only looked from Michael to the guards, then back again, her face a mask of confusion and fear. She didn't move. Michael knew he had to create a diversion. He grabbed a metal bedside table, overturning it with a crash, sending medical equipment clattering to the floor. The guards flinched, momentarily distracted. It was all he needed. He dove towards the door, not to escape, but to draw them out, away from Emily. He burst into the corridor, sprinting, the guards hot on his heels. He's escaping with the patient, one guard yelled into his comms. Lock down the wing. Michael heard the distant clang of heavy doors slamming shut. He was trapped, but he had bought Emily a few precious seconds. He ducked into a utility closet, slamming the door shut, hoping to buy more time, to formulate a new plan. He could hear the guards' heavy boots thudding past, their voices growing louder. He pressed himself against the back wall, his breath ragged, the pain in his side a searing agony. He heard them stop outside the closet door. He's not in the room. Check the surrounding areas. He must be close. He couldn't have gotten far. Michael heard the click of a safety being disengaged. He knew they wouldn't hesitate to use lethal force. He had to think fast. He looked around the cramped closet. Cleaning supplies, mops, buckets. Nothing useful. Then he heard a new voice, cold and precise, cutting through the static of the guard's comms. Michael, this is Dr. Eris. You're cornered. There's nowhere to go. Give yourself up and we can discuss a less painful resolution. Eris, the puppet master. Michael's blood ran cold. He knew Eris wouldn't offer a less painful resolution. He'd offer oblivion. Emily is still here, Eris continued, his voice resonating with a chilling calm. We can continue her treatment, restore her to full compliance. Or if you resist, we can simply expedite her recalibration. Your choice, Michael. A wave of impotent fury washed over Michael. He was trapped, cornered, and Eris was using Emily as leverage. He squeezed the data chip in his hand. This was it. The proof. The only thing that mattered now was getting it out, even if it cost him everything. He heard the guards preparing to breach the closet door. He had seconds. He looked around wildly. A ventilation shaft high on the wall, barely large enough for him to squeeze through. A desperate, impossible gamble. But what choice did he have? He scrambled onto a stack of buckets, his injured side screaming in protest. He fumbled with the screws holding the vent cover in place, his fingers trembling, slick with sweat. The door began to rattle, the wood groaning under the force of the guard's assault. One screw came loose, then another. The door was splintering. Michael pulled frantically at the vent cover. It suddenly gave way with a screech of metal, falling to the floor with a clang. He heard the door burst open behind him. He's in here. Michael didn't look back. He shoved himself headfirst into the dark, dusty shaft, scraping his skin, ignoring the pain. He could hear shouts, the thud of heavy boots, and then a gunshot echoing eerily down the metal tunnel. He crawled further, faster, into the suffocating darkness, the data chip still clutched in his hand, a tiny beacon in the overwhelming black. He had to reach Emily. He had to get them both off this island. The fight had only just begun, and the odds were stacked impossibly against them. But he wouldn't give up. Not now. Not ever. The tiny light of the tracker pulsed, a frantic heartbeat against Michael's thumb. He moved like a ghost through the dense, moonless jungle, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and something acrid, almost metallic, that seemed to cling to the leaves. Every rustle, every snap of a twig beneath his worn boots, sent a jolt of adrenaline through him. He was no longer just seeking a story. He was fighting for a life, for their lives. The tracker led him deeper into the island's interior, past towering, unfamiliar flora and through narrow ravines. He could hear the distant, rhythmic thrumming now, a low vibration that seemed to resonate in his chest, growing stronger with every step. This was the source of the island's insidious power, the heart of the operation. He knew it. Finally, the jungle gave way to a clearing, revealing a sprawling, low-slung complex of dark, windowless buildings. They were built from a strange, matte-black material that absorbed what little starlight there was, making them almost invisible against the night. Security lights bathed the perimeter in a harsh, white glow, revealing armed guards patrolling with an almost robotic precision. This wasn't just a research facility, it was a fortress. Michael pressed himself against the last line of trees, observing. The tracker's signal was strong now, indicating Emily was inside, somewhere in the heart of that ominous structure. He had to get in. He noticed a pattern in the guards' patrols, a brief blind spot near a service entrance on the far side. It was a long shot, a dash across open ground, but it was his only chance. Taking a deep breath, he waited for the precise moment, then sprinted. The ground felt impossibly far, the air impossibly thick. He reached the entrance, a heavy steel door, and fumbled with the simple lock he'd found in his pocket, a tool David had given him, a relic from his own days of urban exploration, a lifetime ago. It clicked open with a soft metallic whisper, and Michael slipped inside, pulling the door shut behind him. The interior was a sterile maze of white corridors, illuminated by recessed lighting. The air was cool, smelling faintly of ozone and disinfectant. The thrumming was louder here, a constant oppressive presence. He moved cautiously, following the tracker, his mind racing. He passed labs filled with glowing screens and strange machinery, then what looked like monitoring stations. He saw people in white coats, their faces tired, focused, utterly devoid of the casual cruelty he'd expected. They looked like scientists, not torturers. That made it even more chilling. The tracker led him to a wing marked Cognitive Restoration Unit. His heart hammered. He pushed open a door to find a series of individual rooms, each with a single bed and an array of sophisticated medical equipment. And there, in one of the rooms, lying still on a bed, and 4 drip in her arm, was Emily. "Emily," he whispered, rushing to her side. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused, distant. She looked pale, disoriented. "Michael." Her voice was a fragile thread. Where are we?" "It's okay, Em. We're getting out of here," he said, holding her hand, trying to project a strength he didn't entirely feel. He quickly checked her vitals, searching for any signs of injury or further memory loss. She seemed physically unharmed, but her gaze was still hazy, her memories clearly fragmented. Suddenly, a calm, measured voice broke the silence. "I wouldn't advise that, Mr. Hayes." Michael spun around. Standing in the doorway was a man in an immaculate white lab coat, his silver hair neatly combed, his eyes a piercing blue behind wire-rimmed glasses. It was Dr. Eris Thorne, the man from the old articles, the brilliant, controversial neuroscientist. "Thorne," Michael growled, stepping in front of Emily, shielding her. "What have you done to her? What is this place?" Thorne smiled, a placid, unsettling expression. "A sanctuary, Mr. Hayes. A crucible. A place where humanity can finally shed its most burdensome chains." He gestured around the room. "And Miss Hayes, like all our guests, is on the cusp of true liberation." Michael scoffed. "Liberation? You're stealing people's lives, erasing who they are. And what are they, Mr. Hayes, without the weight of their past?" Thorne countered, stepping further into the room. Memory, you see, is both our greatest gift and our most profound curse. It's the repository of joy, yes, but also of trauma, prejudice, hatred, regret. It's the engine of conflict, the foundation of our deepest sorrows. He walked towards a large monitor on the wall, displaying complex brainwave patterns. Here on this island, we found a way to gently, surgically remove that burden. Not just specific memories, but the capacity for unwanted memory recall. A clean slate, a fresh start. Imagine a world where every morning is truly a new beginning, unburdened by yesterday's mistakes, yesterday's pain. Emily stirred, her eyes fixed on Thorn, a flicker of fear in their depths. He talked to me about my parents, my accident. Thorn nodded gently. Indeed, Miss Hayes. We identified your core trauma, the accident, the guilt you carried. Imagine waking up free from that crushing weight, free from the endless loop of what-ifs. You sick bastard, Michael seethed, his hand clenching into a fist. You play God with people's minds. You call that freedom? That's slavery. You're turning them into empty shells. Empty shells. Thorn chuckled softly. On the contrary, we are creating individuals capable of pure, unadulterated experience. They learn anew, they form new connections, unmarred by the scars of the past. We provide them with new, positive foundational memories, carefully curated, guiding them towards a more harmonious existence. We are evolving humanity, Mr. Hayes. And who gave you the right? Michael demanded. Who funded this monstrous experiment? Thorn's gaze sharpened, losing a fraction of its composure. Suffice it to say, there are powerful individuals who share my vision. They understand that true societal progress cannot occur while humanity remains shackled by its history. This island is merely the prototype, a proof of concept. Michael looked at Emily, then back at Thorn. You won't get away with this. I'll expose you. The world will know. Ah, the journalist. Thorn sighed, a hint of weariness in his voice. Always seeking to disrupt. But how will you expose us, Mr. Hayes? Your memories are already compromised. Miss Hayes are even more so. And even if you somehow escaped, who would believe the ramblings of two people who claim an entire island erases memories? You'd be dismissed, institutionalized perhaps. We've accounted for such contingencies. We'll have proof, Michael retorted, remembering the small data chip David had mentioned, hidden in the tracker. He needed to find the central control, the source of the memory erasing field, and download something. Anything. Proof. Thorn raised an eyebrow. Our data is encrypted. Our operations meticulously shielded. This island is off every map, outside every jurisdiction. You are surrounded by people who believe in this work, Mr. Hayes. You are trapped. Michael glanced at Emily, who was struggling to sit up. She looked at him, then at Thorn, a dawning horror in her eyes as fragments of memory seemed to fight for purchase. The light. The humming. It feels wrong. She's waking up, Michael said, a flicker of hope. She's fighting it. Thorn's smile vanished. A temporary anomaly. Her system is merely recalibrating. She will soon return to a state of peaceful receptivity. He reached for a console by the bed. A mild boost to the cognitive repatterning sequence should stabilize her. No. Michael lunged, knocking Thorn's hand away from the controls. The doctor, though older, was surprisingly agile, stepping back with a frown. Security. Thorn called out, his voice now sharp and authoritative. We need to go, Em. Michael grabbed Emily's arm, pulling her off the bed. She swayed, disoriented, but clung to him. The core, Michael said, looking at Thorn. Where's the main control for this whole operation? Thorn simply stared, his expression a mix of annoyance and cold calculation. You truly believe you can undo my life's work? A lifetime of dedication to the betterment of humanity. Footsteps echoed in the corridor. Michael knew they were out of time. He pushed Emily gently towards the door. Go. Just run. Find a way out. But I don't remember. Emily began, tears welling in her eyes. Trust me. Michael insisted, his voice urgent. He pointed to the tracker. Follow this. It'll lead you to the edge of the complex, away from the guards. He knew he was sending her into danger, but he also knew he couldn't fight Thorn and his guards while protecting a disoriented Emily. He had to disable the system. He had to get that proof. As Emily, stumbling, began to move, Michael turned back to Thorn. You want to erase memories? Let's see how your memory holds up when your entire operation crumbles around you. He saw the flicker of something in Thorn's eyes, not fear, but a profound, almost fanatical resolve. "You underestimate the strength of conviction, Mr. Hayes, and the power of a vision." The door burst open and two burly guards rushed in, weapons raised. Michael didn't hesitate. He knew he couldn't fight them head-on. He ducked under a guard's arm, grabbing a heavy metal trolley full of medical supplies, and shoved it towards the other, creating a momentary distraction. He then bolted, not towards the exit, but deeper into the facility, following the most concentrated thrumming sound, the one that vibrated in his very bones. Emily's life, his life, the truth. It all depended on him destroying the heart of Thorn's memory machine. He ran through more corridors, the guards hot on his heels. He could hear Thorn's voice over an intercom, calm but firm, directing them. "Do not harm him unnecessarily. Bring him to the central chamber. He needs to witness the full scope of our endeavor." Michael knew what that meant. Thorn wanted him to see the ultimate memory wipe, perhaps even experience it, as a final twisted victory. But Michael had another plan. He burst into a vast, cavernous chamber, the source of the island's hum. In the center, a colossal, multifaceted crystal pulsed with an ethereal blue light, surrounded by intricate machinery, cables snaking across the floor, feeding into the crystal. This was it, the memory erasing core. He could see the guards entering the chamber behind him. He had seconds. His eyes scanned the consoles surrounding the crystal. He needed to find the emergency override, the shutdown sequence, something that would disrupt this insidious operation. He saw a panel marked Core Regulation. He knew it was a gamble, a shot in the dark, but it was their only hope. He lunged for the console, his fingers flying across the holographic interface, trying to decipher the complex symbols and diagrams. The guards were closing in. One tackled him from behind, sending him sprawling. His head hit the cold metal floor, stars exploding in his vision. He tasted blood. "Foolish man," Thorn's voice echoed, as the doctor entered the chamber, flanked by more guards. "You could have had a fresh start. A new life." Michael pushed himself up, his body screaming in protest. He saw the data chip from David's tracker still clutched in his hand. He had to upload it, download something, anything to prove what was happening here. He scrambled back to the console, ignoring the throbbing pain, ignoring the guards. He saw a port, a single standard USB port, a tiny, almost insignificant detail in a room of overwhelming technology. With a surge of adrenaline, he jammed the chip into the port, praying. He saw a prompt flash on the screen, initializing data transfer. He didn't know what he was downloading, but he hoped it was enough. "Stop him!" Thorn roared, his composure finally cracking. As the guards rushed him, Michael slammed his hand down on the largest, most prominent button on the console, marked with a stark red symbol. A blaring alarm immediately erupted, deafening, reverberating through the entire chamber. The colossal crystal in the center began to fluctuate wildly, its blue light flickering, then surging to an unbearable intensity. "What have you done?" Thorn shrieked, his face contorted in disbelief and rage. The ground began to shake. Sparks flew from the machinery. The air crackled with raw energy. Michael felt a strange pull, a disorienting sensation as if his thoughts were being stretched, distorted. He knew the island was fighting back, the memory field intensifying, desperate to protect its core. The guards, momentarily stunned by the chaos, hesitated. Michael used the opportunity. He lunged past them, ignoring the shouts, the alarms, the agonizing pressure in his head. He had to get out. He had to find Emily. He burst out of the central chamber, the alarms screaming, the facility lights flickering erratically. He could hear distant explosions now, the thrumming turning into a violent shudder. He ran, driven by instinct, by a desperate need to survive, to remember, to escape this living nightmare. He knew he had downloaded something. He just prayed it was enough. He found Emily just outside the complex, stumbling towards the jungle, guided by the tracker. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with terror, but she was moving. "Michael!" she cried, rushing into his arms. "The island, it's breaking apart. We have to go!" He yelled over the din, pulling her towards the small boat they had arrived in, somehow still intact despite the chaos. The ground beneath their feet trembled violently. Smoke billowed from the facility, and the blue light of the crystal pulsed erratically, casting monstrous shadows across the trees. They scrambled into the boat, Michael fumbling with the engine. He knew the island's security systems would be offline, but the very ground was collapsing. Chunks of rock and earth began to fall into the churning water around them. The engine sputtered, then roared to life. Michael pushed the throttle forward, sending the boat surging away from the shore, away from the screaming alarms, away from the collapsing complex. As they sped into the open sea, the island behind them was a vision of apocalyptic destruction. Explosions ripped through the facility, the colossal crystal shattered, erupting in a blinding flash of blue light that illuminated the entire horizon before plunging the island back into darkness and ruin. They were safe, physically, but as Michael looked at Emily, her face streaked with tears and dirt, her eyes still clouded with confusion, he knew their ordeal was far from over. He held the data chip tightly in his hand, his last tangible link to the truth. His own memories felt fractured, like a mosaic violently shaken, pieces scattered and missing. He remembered Emily, remembered David, remembered the boat, but the details of the past few days, the names, the specific conversations were a blur, a terrifying void. Emily looked at him, her brow furrowed. Michael, who was David? His heart sank. The island had taken its toll. They had escaped, but they hadn't escaped unscathed. The fight to reclaim their past, to piece together the fragments of who they were, had only just begun. It would be a long, arduous journey, a silent battle fought within the confines of their own minds. But they had each other, and they had the proof, and together they would face the terrifying blank canvas of their memories, determined to paint their truth back onto it, one painful, precious piece at a time. The island was gone, but its shadow would forever linger, a chilling reminder of the fragility of identity and the terrifying power of a memory erased.